I'll stand up so I can see your faces, which is a little bit more friendly. No, you can sit down, but you have to say what they say.
Yes, James tuleb püsti, kuna mulle meeldib näha, siis inimeste nägusid suhtleb.
So the declared topic is on the Heart Sutra, but I'm not going to do it in a very academic way. Rather, I want to show the positioning of the central idea in the Heart Sutra as it moves towards the earlier schools and the later schools.
Tänane teema on siis südasuutra, aga ta ei kirjelda seda või analüüsida teksti nagu akadeemilisel moel, vaid vaatab siis seda varasemalt hilisemate koolkondade valguses.
In the founding stories of Buddhism with the current Buddha, with Buddha Shakyamuni, it starts with him having an understanding that things are not what they appear to be.
Buddha õpetus algab siis mõistmisest, et asjad ei ole sellised, nagu nad näivad.
That is to say, he grew up in a privileged environment where all his needs were very easily catered for.
Ta kasvas üles keskkonnas, kus kõigi tema vajadused olid rahuldatud.
Indeed, we could say he suffered from a kind of bourgeois complacency.
Mingis mõttes ta kannatas siis sellise bourgeois või väikekodanliku keskkonna.
That is to say, there was an ease or a smoothness in his life where he was untroubled.
Nagu see oli kerge lihtsus suuremate häirivate teguriteta.
And not to be troubled is of course something that we all yearn for in one way or another.
Ja loomulikult keegi meist ei soovi olla nagu häiritud või hädas mingil teise moel.
And because of that we often surround ourselves with a kind of muffling duvet.
Ja seetõttu ümbritseme ennast tihti. Could you say it?
You know, duvet is like the warm thing you put over yourself. So it muffles you, it means you don't see, you don't hear too much, but it's cozy inside.
Tihti me katame ennast sellise siis sooja tekiga, sees mugavaga välja, ei näe sealt seest.
But then when the Buddha was out on his horse looking around, he saw a sick person, an old person, and then he saw a dead person.
Paleest väljudes nägi ka siis haiget inimest, vana inimest ja surnud inimest.
That caused him to think, well, the security that I seem to have has no solid foundation.
Ja ta mõistis, et see turvalisus, sellel ei ole mingit püsivat alust.
This body, which my existence rests in, is very vulnerable.
See keha, mis mu teadvus asub, on väga haavatav.
And it can easily fall apart.
See võib kergesti laiali lahuleda.
So he became interested, what is the glue that holds things together?
Teda hakkas huvitama, mis on see liim, mis hoiab asju koos.
For example, we're in a building and we can see how it's put together with a lot of cement.
Viibides hoones võime jälgida või vaadata seda koos hoiab siis tsement.
As long as the cement is holding the stones in place, we see a seamless shape in front of us.
Niiga kui tsement hoiab koos hoiab, näeme.
And it means we see a shape which appears to be just itself.
Näeme vormi, mis tundub olevat iseendas tervik.
That is to say, we take things for granted. We take them to be existing in themselves.
Ehk teisalt öeldes me võtame asju iseenesest eksisteerivana või olemasolevana.
And this young man, Siddhartha, who becomes the Buddha, started to investigate what was the glue out of which this world of seeming fixed individual entities is created.
Ja no Siddhartha siis hakkas uurima, mis on see liim, mis just neid väliselt justkui eraldi terviklikke objekte koos hoiab.
And he came to see that this is attachment.
Ja ta mõistis, et see on kiindumus.
In modern language we would call it semiotics.
Moodsas keeles võiks selle kohta öelda semiotika.
That is to say, we create structures of interpretation and meaning.
Ehk siis teisalt öeldes me loome, can you repeat it, sorry?
We create structures, patterns of interpretation and meaning.
Loome siis interpretatsiooni ja tähenduse struktuure.
And then we fall in love with them to such an extent that we feel that they are existing by themselves.
Me armume siis konstrueeritud struktuurisse nii palju tundub, et nad eksisteerivad iseenesest.
For example, if you go to an art gallery
Näiteks kunstigaleriisse minnes,
and you look at a painting,
vaadates maali,
the shapes in the painting catch you.
Maali vorm haarab sind.
You feel yourself drawn into the image.
Tunned, et see kujutis tõmbab sind enda poole.
But you can also see the brush strokes and the strokes that have been made by the knife and maybe the movement of the hand and so on.
Aga samas võite näha ka siis pintsilöökide jälge, võib-olla sõrmejälge, muu instrumendi jälge maalil.
A painting is on the cusp. It hovers between these two aspects.
Ja maal siis kõigub nii-öelda noaterased kahe aspekti vahel.
It is both just what it is, the thing itself.
Ta on mõlemat nii see, kui ta on.
And it's a history of activity.
Ja see on selle loomise ajalugu.
The artist has built it up bit by bit as she took color after color, rubbing some down, scraping, gradually arriving at a point where it feels to the artist as if the work is done.
Ta on nii kaua siis lühidalt öeldes maaliga vaeva näinud, kuni tundus, et see on valmis.
Most people, when they look at paintings, are taken by the thingness of them.
Enamus inimesi haarab maali juures selle.
Artists are more curious, how was this made?
Can you say the thingness in
The
some other
thingness
ways?
means the facticity, the givenness of how it is.
Selle asja siis.
Nii nagu ta paistab.
Okei, jah, et nii nagu ta paistab, aga kunstniku huvitab rohkem, the artist is more interested in...
Yeah, the artist is more, if you're another artist, you're more interested in how did they do it.
Jah, kunstniku huvitab rohkem see, kuidas see tehtud on.
In the same way, I'm interested in the fact that my watch works.
Näiteks tema on huvitav sellest, kuidas ta kell töötab.
I'm not very interested in what goes on inside.
Teda huvitav väga, mis seal sees toimub.
Because I want this just to be a watch.
Ta tahab, et see oleks lihtsalt kell.
If it becomes very complicated and goes wrong, then it's trouble for me.
Kui see on väga keeruline ja midagi valesti, siis häirib.
And so, my ignorance in not knowing how the watch works
Tema teadmatus selle kohta, kuidas kell töötab,
creates a sweet harmony with my stupidity in just using it to tell the time.
et loob sellise meeldiva magusa harmoonia tema rumaluse teadmatusega koos sellega, sest et see on lihtsalt üks asi, mis aega näitab.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is to say, I fall asleep in the watchness of the watch.
Teisalt öeldes ta uinub selle kellasusse.
When I see something like this, I'm not deeply troubled.
Et kui ta midagi sellist näeb, ta ei ole väga sügavalt mures.
Because I have confidence in my entire education, being in university and so on. I know that a watch is a watch.
Kuna ta on kindel selles, et see kell on kell kogu oma harituse juures.
So from the point of view of Buddha Shakyamuni, I am a very stupid person.
Buddha seisukohast on ta väga rumal inimene.
Because when we only see the watch
Sest kui me ainult näeme kella
and we fall asleep on that very small segment of understanding of what this is,
ja kui me oleme rahul ainult selle väikese osaga sellest, mis see kell on,
we don't question at all.
me ei pane midagi küsimärgi alla.
That is to say, the world that we inhabit is made of stuff that we know and therefore don't know.
Ehk teisiti öeldes maailm koostab asjadest, mida me teame, tegelikult ei tea.
And this becomes increasingly the case for all of us.
Ja see on järjest enam, see kehtib järjest enam me kõigi kohta.
400 years ago, we had people who understood how everything was made.
400 aastat tagasi oli olemas inimene, kes teadsid, kuidas kõik oli loodud.
Nowadays, we have objects like this that we don't understand at all, and we use maybe 5% of its potential.
Tänapäeval on sellised vidinad, mille funktsioneerimist või ülesehitust me ei tea ja kasutame ainult 5%.
So this is exactly the Buddha's original concern. What is the nature of falling asleep?
See on ka Buddha mure, mis on uinumise olemus.
And we fall asleep in the dream of our assumptions.
Me uinume oma eelduste unenäkku.
In taking the seeming givenness of the world to be something which doesn't require examination.
Võttes maailma sellise nagu antud olemasoleva objektina, mis ei vaja nagu analüüsimist.
So the initial analysis that manifested out of this was that of trying to break down the seeming givenness of appearance into its constituent parts.
Oluline on siis püüda. Sorry, I lost it.
Okay. So the first analysis that was engaged in was to break down the seeming simplicity, the givenness of phenomena into their constituent parts.
Ja esimene analüüs on siis nii-öelda tükeldada see näib või see olev maailm siis nendeks osadeks.
This was done in terms of this famous category of the 5 skandhas, or the 5 heaps or assemblages.
See on kõigepealt tehtud siis 5 skanda, kõigi kuhjana.
So in that analysis there is firstly form, which means shape and color.
Selle analüüsi järgi siis esimene kuhi vorm.
Then there is a feeling tone response.
Seejärel tunne vastusreaktsioon sellele,
which is either positive, negative or neutral.
Mis on kas positiivne, negatiivne või neutraalne.
So when we see something, we have an immediate, often visceral sense that we like it or we don't like it.
Midagi nähes on meil koheselt tunne, kas meile meeldib see või ei meeldi see.
Or it may just hardly register at all.
Või siis ei pane seda üldse tähele.
Thirdly, you have a mixed category of perception and interpretation.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Thirdly, you have a category which unites perception and interpretation.
Ja kolmandaks siis kategooria, mis ühendab taju ja interpretatsiooni.
So, that when we see something, how we habitually name it, or how we place it in a category, even if we don't know its particular name, our nosological function, it is inseparable from perception.
See, kuidas me nimetame seda objekti lahutamatu selle tajust.
Fourthly, we have our capacity for formation or association, which brings together a more developed interpretive matrix, which feeds into what we're seeing.
Me võime luua siis sellist interpreteerivat maatriksit.
That is to say, on the perception of a simple object, many things can come to mind.
Sellist objekti nähes võib mitmeid asju meelde tulla.
We don't have to intentionally think about them. They seem to arrive like a swarm of insects or a flock of birds.
Me ei tingimata nendest mõtlema, et nad tunduvad saabuvad nagu sääsed või kärbsed selle pudeli poole.
No, this is a plastic bottle.
See on plastikpudel.
There's a lot of plastic in the world. There are certain ecological problems associated with plastic.
Maailmas on palju plastikut ja sellega seotud ökoloogilisi probleeme.
If it's a hot day and you've got a water bottle of plastic in your car, it's not a good idea to drink it after a day because the chemicals leach into the water.
Et jättes pudeli päevaks ajaks palavasse autosse pole enam hea idee seda juua, kuna kemikaalid siis valgud ette.
That is to say, these kind of memories or things you've heard or associations gather around and settle on the object without you having to make any effort.
Et seda laadi mõtted, mälestused, ideed seostuvad kohe selle objektiga ilma, et peaks.
That is to say, it points to the relativizing function of cognitive activity.
See viitab siis suhtelisele,
When we see an object like this, we see it in relation to other objects.
Yes. Sellist objekti nähes seostume seda kohe nagu teiste objektidega.
So, for example, it's not glass.
Näiteks see ei ole klaas.
Glass is excluded from this because it's plastic.
Klaas on sellest välistatud, kuna see on plastik.
So whenever we define an object, all that it is not stands in relation to it.
Objekti defineerides siis kõik see, mida ta ei ole, seisab sellest eraldi.
So I can say with some confidence, I'm not a woman.
Ta võib öelda teatud kindlusega, et ta ei ole naine.
But if somebody says to me, James, you're a man, what does it mean to be a man? Then that's more difficult.
Aga kui keegi ütleb talle, et James, sa oled mees, siis mida see tähendab olla mees, siis on juba tunduvalt raskem.
Defining something just in terms of itself without using language that links it out to something else is impossible.
Defineerida midagi iseendas ilma suhestumata selle väliste objektidega on võimatu.
So this fourth organizing factor is the kind of formative interrelatedness of all phenomena, which allows particular entities to come into being.
See neljas organiseeriv faktor organiseerib neid asju niimoodi, mis lubab neil olemas olla.
Then fifthly, you have consciousness.
Viiendaks on siis teadvus.
And consciousness is to be conscious of something.
Teadvus, mis on millestki teada.
In Tibetan it's called nampa shepa, and nampa means a shape, a form. Shepa means to know. That is to say, we always know something. We are conscious of something.
Tiibeti keeles nampa on vorm ja see teadmist millist vormist teadar olemistes.
So say for example, in the summer you've been out camping and the night is dark and you go out to have a pee. Don't see very much.
Kui väljas on pime, tarvis number ühtemine tegema, siis ei näe midagi. Sorry.
It's okay, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But then in the morning, at the beginning of the dawn, at first it's dark and then gradually some differentiation arises.
Hommikul vahetuses esimesed vormid tekivad.
It's difficult to be conscious of the dark. If
raske olla teadlane pimedusest.
But as the dawn arises, differentiation occurs and you start to see particular things, the shape of a tree, the side of a hill.
Hommikuvalguse saabudes vaikselt tekivad vormid, mäevorm ja muu vorm.
So, in this early Buddhist analysis, all the phenomena of the world, both external and internal, can be understood as composites created by the interaction or juxtaposition of these 5 factors.
Et varase budistliku filosoofia maailma ja kõik need sisemised välised faktorid, siis need võib panna selle 5 põhja või kirja analüüsida 5 põhja kaudu.
And linked with this, there were certain other lists of basic ingredients for our experience.
Ja seosta neid teiste kogemuse ja koostisosadega.
So the idea was, if you calm down your speed of mental functioning through the practice of meditation,
idee oli see, et kui rahustada maha oma teadvus erinevate siis tehnikate abil,
you will start to wash out the glue that holds together these composite forms.
hakkad nägema seda liivi, mis kõike seda siis koos hoiab, neid erinevad vorme.
In the 2 main practices of meditation that are used for that, what's called shamatha, calming the mind through focusing on the breath or some simple external object.
2 peamist tehnikat on siis shamatha.
And then secondly, vipassana, or seeing clearly, that is to say, observing what actually occurs in its first basic simplicity.
Vipassana siis tegelikult nägeb asjades, kuidas nad kõigepealt oma lihtsuses tekivad või paistavad.
So, say for example, in that kind of practice, if you're sitting and you start to take your attention through your body.
Tavaliselt tehnikat kasutades istudes kui retention.
You start to take your attention.
So
you focus your attention and then you start to scan through the body.
Yes. Kui tähelepanu suundub kehale.
Then, say, you become aware of something in your shoulder.
Saad teadlikud näiteks millest oma õlas.
Our normal response is that, oh, my shoulder is sore.
Tavaline normaalne reaktsioon on, et oi, mu õlas on valu.
But this is actually a conclusion.
Kuid see on tegelikult järeldus.
There are many stages prior to arriving at thinking, I have a sore shoulder.
Tegelikult on mitu erinevat aastat või etappi enne, kui selle järeldusele jõutakse.
What is it that is actually registered?
Mis on see, mida tegelikult tähele märgatakse?
There is an evanescent proprioception. There's some transient, some passing arising of internal sensation.
On mööduv taju märkamine.
What is it like?
Milline see on?
Difficult to say.
Seda on raske öelda.
Maybe it feels a bit like tearing or burning or dull.
Võib-olla see on põletav, võib-olla see on tuim valu.
You can probably feel some sensation in your body just now. Maybe your head's a bit tilted or your back's a bit bent.
Kindlasti tunnete ka praegu oma kehas erinevaid.
If you attend to the immediacy of that sensation,
kui pöörata tähelepanu selle tunde,
it's very difficult to say anything.
on raske, kui te pöörata tähelepanu selle tunde, või sellel praegu hetkel olevale tundele on raske selle kohta midagi öelda.
But if you wrap it in a story, then you can do something with it.
Kuid luues selle ümber loo, seda tundub lihtsalt kirjeldada.
You might think, oh, my back's a bit sore, I need to take more exercise, I need to go to an osteopath.
Et mu selg on valus, pean minema ühe või teise arsti juurde.
Then there is something to say.
Siis on juba midagi öelda.
Because you're talking about something.
sa räägid millestki.
So if a friend says to you, oh, my back's really sore,
kui sõber ütleb, et oih, mu selg on väga valus,
you can join in a conversation.
Võib sekkuda tõestusesse.
It's quite socially adapted.
Et see on nii-öelda sotsiaalselt.
Many people's conversation is largely a litany of problems.
Paljude inimeste vestlus ongi laias laastus probleemide litaania.
But if you were talking to somebody and said, it wouldn't be so helpful.
Aga kui rääkides ainult selliste häälitsustega, siis ei oleks sellest väga palju kasu.
How would they reply?
Kuidas sellele vastata?
It would break down. So what we have here is an example of the social construction of science.
Mida me siin näeme, on siis märkide sotsiaalne konstrueerimine.
Which of course is the Russian psychologists and literary critics like Lev Vygotsky and Mikhail Bakhtin were very concerned with.
Mitmed what field they were?
They were concerned with the social construction of science.
Mitmed vene teadlased, mul praegust ei jäänud meelde nimed, olid taoliste märkide siis konstrueerimise.
However, there's a bit of a problem. Because if you slow everything down so that you just have these very basic, almost inexpressible building blocks, you can't do very much in the world. You become a socially useless person. Kui neid nii-öelda ehitusblokke ei kasuta suheldes muutud sotsiaalselt nagu kasutuks inimeseks. Which was one of the reasons why the Buddha encouraged his followers to become monks and nuns.
Seetõttu Buddha julgustas oma õpilasi saama munkadeks ja nunnadeks.
So that socially useless people could get enlightened, while socially useless people would not get enlightened.
Sorry, they're both socially useless?
Yeah, the monks and nuns are socially useless.
Et selleks, et sotsiaalselt nagu kasutavad inimesed, siis võiksid virguda.
And they have to be supported by socially useful people like farmers and weavers and so on.
Ja neid pidid toetama siis sotsiaalselt kasulikud inimesed nagu farmerid, kaupmehed.
But the farmers and weavers don't get enlightened exactly because they are feeding and clothing the monks who are getting enlightened.
Need farmerid ja käsitöölised ei virgu, kuna nemad pidid tegelema siis munkade ja nunnade toetamise söötmisega.
So you can see there are certain internal contradictions for this as a sign of social existence.
Siin on sellised sisemised vastuolud sellises sotsiaalses ülesehituses.
And this is where the ideas of the Heart Sutra come in.
Ja sealt tulevad ka südamesuutra ideed.
The ideas embedded in the Heart Sutra started very early on.
Südamesuutra olulisemad ideed said alguse väga varakult.
In current academic inquiry, there's more and more attention paid to the link between the Greek tradition of Phaeronian skepticism and the development of the Madhyamika critique.
Akadeemilistes uurimistes nendest rohkem püütakse näha seotud siis Kreeka skeptikute ja Madhyamaka filosoofia vahel.
Both of these are skeptical in their turn. That is to say, they resist the tendency to assert something, instead of which they stay with the importance of pressing forward questions. They resist assertion. They don't do assertion, or they try to avoid assertion.
Püüavad vältida siis järelduse. Assertion.
Assertion. To make a postulation, to propose something, to put it forward.
Mingite lõplike seisukohtade või järelduste esitamist püüavad vältida.
And rather to see the faults of construction.
Pigem näha siis selle konstruktsiooni vigasid.
In the Heart Sutra is an early stage in this process.
Ja südamesuutra on siis varane etapp selles protsessis.
it's a very interesting synchronistic kind of document.
Väga huvitav sünkrooniline dokument.
Because it's a document that brings together two warring factions, structurally slightly incompatible factions.
Kuna see toob kokku kaks omavahel sobimatut poolt.
For the Theravadan tradition, you have Shariputra, the close disciple of Buddha Shakyamuni.
Theravada poolt on siis Shariputra, Shakyamuni õpilane.
And then for the Mahayana turn, you have Avalokiteshvara.
Mahayana poolt on siis Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara.
And they collaborate together as a double act.
Ja nad tegutsevad koos või ühesõnaga koostööd.
Both being inspired by the meditation of Buddha Shakyamuni.
Mõlemat inspireerib siis Buddha Shakyamuni mõtlus.
So that would be like the United Nations getting Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama to sit down and be friendly.
See on nagu United Nations, mis Eesti peaks on ÜRO, jah, nagu kus siis Putin ja kes see teine was the second Putin ja Obama sõbralikult vestlemas siis.
Because the important thing is that what is described in these ancient texts is always exactly what's happening today. Human life is always the same. We have friends and we have enemies.
Et see tekst kirjeldab situatsioon sarnane tegeliku eluga, alati on meil vaenlasi ja sõpru.
So in the Heart Sutra, due to the questioning of Shariputra, Avalokiteshvara sets out that these 5 skandhas, these 5 building blocks, which are seen as the irreducible basis of all phenomena, both external and internal, all that is me and all that is not me.
Shariputra küsimusel toob Avalokiteshvara välja kõik selle, mis on maailmas, mis ei ole mina, mis on mina.
That these are in fact empty.
Et need on tegelikult, see kõik on tegelikult tühi.
That is to say, they are themselves devoid of inherent existence.
Et nad on ise tühjad oma olemusest.
So it's not as if we were somehow to be able to take the cement out of this building and then separate out all the pieces of stone and wood and so on.
See pole nii, et peaks need ehitusplokid tsemendist välja võtma, eraldi tõstma.
Then the stone could, if we did that, the stone could then be put together in different shapes and make different kinds of buildings.
Seda tehes saaks nendest kividest uue vormiga ehituse teha.
Because the basic idea of these 5 skandhas, these 5 building blocks, is that they can be endlessly juxtaposed, put into different relations, to create all these many different things that we experience.
5 skanda põhiidee on, et neid võib nagu lõputult erinevates kombinatsioonides kokku panna, et erinevaid vorme saada.
The Heart Sutra says form is emptiness, emptiness is not other than form.
Kuid Südasutra ütleb, et vorm on tühjus ja tühjus pole midagi muud kui vorm.
That is to say, when we see a form, we don't need to do anything to it. It doesn't need to be transformed into another kind of form in order for it to be more workable.
Et siis teisest öeldes selle vormiga ei pea midagi muud ette võtma, et oleks.
What we have to do is to see it as it is, rather than projecting onto it.
Mida tegema peaks nägema, mis ta on, mitte sellest objekti midagi projektiseerima.
So, I don't have to analyze the object.
Ma ei pea objekti analüüsima.
Because the object that I see
Sest objekt, mida ma näen,
exists for me always as a mélange, a mixture
sest see eksisteerib alati seguna
of the subject and the object.
subjektist ja objektist.
So, for example, here beside me there is a small tree.
Näiteks siin kõrval on üks väike puu.
It's obvious it's a tree.
On ilmselgelt see on puu.
What do we see?
Mida me näeme?
We see a tree.
Me näeme puud.
We interpret a tree.
interpreteerime puud.
And onto that we are constructing what is there.
Selle peale me siis konstrueerime selle, mis seal on.
Because we take the treeness of the tree to be something existing in itself,
Siis me võtame puusust millegina, mis eksisteerib iseendas.
we don't recognize that tree is the end product of a whole series of interpretations which come together very quickly.
Me ei näe, et puu on siis terve seeria interpretatsioonide kogum.
So, in this first formulation, the Theravadan analytic approach, they would be looking at this and trying to observe the process of constructing what appears to be the case.
Teravada vaatajärgi siis konstrueeritakse või dekonstrueeritakse objekt tükkideks.
So we might start with the conclusion, this is a tree.
Võib alustada siis kokkuvõttega, et see on puu.
Then we try to see on what basis do I come to this conclusion.
Võib uurida, et mis alusel ma taolise järeldusena siis jõudsin.
I have form, that is to say, I observe shape and color.
Ma näen vormi ja värvi.
I have some emotional reaction to that. I like it, I don't like it.
Mul on teatav emotsionaalne reaktsioon selle suhtes, see meeldib mulle või ei meeldi.
Which draws me towards or away from what I'm seeing.
Mis tõmbab mis selle ligi või tõukab mind eemale sellest, mida ma näen.
And this is very important because it's starting to show I am implicated. I am involved in this.
See on väga tähtis, kuna see näitab, et ma olen seotud.
Now, if I'm involved in this is not self-existing.
Kui mina olen sellega seotud, siis järelikult ei ole see iseenesest eksisteeriv.
Because when I look at this, I can't take my not liking out of it.
Seda vaadates ei saa ma minu selle objekti meeldimist või mitte meeldimist sellest välja võtta.
It's not as if when we encounter people, places, clothes, whatever, that we stop and we kind of knock on the door and say, I have some questions to ask you.
See on nagu mõnda inimest nähes koputaks ukse peale ja ütleks, mul on midagi küsida.
We are already in there.
Me oleme juba seal sees.
That is to say, our interpretation is inseparable from the perception.
Et teisiti öeldes, meie interpretatsioon on lahutamatu meie tajust.
Therefore, analysis is actually very, very difficult.
Seetõttu on analüüs väga raske.
Well known now that in modern physics also people are struggling with this conclusion.
Hästi teada, et tänapäeva füüsikas inimesed on selle järeldusega väga peale.
If the positioning of the observer influences what is observed,
Sorry, can you repeat?
If the positioning, the location, which includes the attitudes of the observer, influences what is observed.
Kui selle vaataja suhtumine mõjutab seda, mida ta vaatleb.
How will you be able to analyze anything?
Kuidas on üldse võimalik midagi analüüsida?
That is to say, objectivity is an impossibility.
Et teisiti öeldes objektiivsus on võimatu.
Or, put it another way, objectivity is a literary trope. It is a style, it is a mood, like a tragedy or a romantic comedy.
Objektiivsus on siis nagu kirjanduslik žanr.
Nothing more than that.
Mitte midagi muud.
It's a way of being.
See on olemise viis.
So just as if you go to the theater and you see, like I saw there's a poster downstairs for Goethe's Faust.
Nagu teatrisse minnes näed seda Fausti kuulutust.
Well, you're probably not going to be happy watching that play.
Arvatavasti pole seda etendust vaates õnnelik.
Because it creates a particular kind of mood.
See loob teatava seisundit.
And probably we could imagine that the theater staging would be slightly gloomy.
Ja arvatavasti see teatri lava ülesehitus on kergelt.
And when Mephistopheles comes on, it it will be a little bit intense with maybe some red backlighting.
kui Mephistopheles lavale tuleb, võib-olla see on intensiivne punane taust.
Oh, start to feel something.
Et hakkate midagi tundma.
Then you look at a photograph of a scientific laboratory.
Siis te vaatate mingisugusel laboratooriumi pilti.
It's very clean.
See on väga puhas.
Staff are wearing protective garments. There is a mood of seriousness.
Et see tekitab teatava sellise tõsiduse tunde meelel, et tahaks jälle panna mingi kaitseülikonna.
They are creating the theater of science.
Et nad loovad siis teaduse teatrit.
A lot of resources go into the elaboration of these structures.
Väga palju vahendeid läheb nendest struktuuride loomisesse.
We no longer believe that philosophers can bring any objective truth.
Me ei usu enam ammu sellesse, et filosoofid võivad viia meid mingisuguse
And we gave up
lõpliku tõeni.
We gave up on theologians being able to establish the true existence of God. We gave that up a long time ago.
Oleme loobunud ka sellest, et teoloogid võivad siis tõestada
Theologians establishing the objective existence of God.
Et teoloogid suudavad tõestada Jumala objektiivset olemasolu.
But we can still believe that science will arrive someplace where that is possible.
Kuid me endiselt loodame, et teadus mingit jõuab sellesse kohta, kus see objektiivselt selles võimalik.
Now the main thrust of the Heart Sutra is against this.
Põhiline südasutra idee on selle vastu.
Because it's pointing out that there is a non-duality or an absence of fundamental contradiction.
Ta viitab mitte kahesusele. Sorry, can you repeat?
It's pointing to the fact that there is a non-duality or a fundamental absence of contradiction.
Ta viitab siis fundamentaalsele vastuolu puudumisele.
Between what appears to have substance
selle vahel, millel justkui tundub olevat substantst või oma olemus.
And its actuality, which is that there's nothing.
Selle tegelikkuse vahel, et seal ei ole midagi.
Nothing in the sense of nothing existing in itself.
Sorry.
Okay. Nothing is there in the sense that there is nothing existing in itself.
Mitte midagi ei ole seal, kuna mitte midagi ei eksisteeri iseenesest.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if I say to you, the leaves are very blue.
Seega, kui ma ütlen teile, et need lehed on väga sinised.
Would you be willing to agree?
Kas te oleksite nõus sellega?
No.
Muidugi mitte.
The leaves are green.
Lehed on rohelised.
How do we know they're green?
Kuidas me teame, et nad on rohelised?
Because they're not blue.
Sest nad ei ole sinised.
They're not red.
Nad ei ole punased.
They're not yellow.
Nad ei ole kollased.
If there was only green, if everything in this universe was only green,
Kui kõik selles maailmas oleks roheline,
would the word green have any meaning?
kas sõna roheline oleks siis mingi tähendus?
The greenness of the green comes into play through its difference from yellow, from red, and so on.
Rohelise värvi rohelisus omandab mingi tähenduse suhtes teiste värvidega.
This is what every student studies in art school.
See on see, mida iga õpilane õpib kunstikoolis.
That some colors are complementary and some are opposition.
Seda, et mõned värvid on täiendavad, mõned on siis vastandvärvid.
And that you can learn to use a little bit of an oppositional color to bring out another one.
Ja et võib kasutada ühte värvi, välja tuua teist värvi.
So if you have a painting with a lot of, I don't know, cobalt blue, and you put in a little bit of chrome yellow, you get a spark.
Et kui on palju koobalt sinist ja natukene sinna hulka panna siis kollast, tekib säde.
So, when we see green,
Seega rohelist nähes,
the green seems to be something inherent in the leaves.
see roheline tundub midagi ainuomast või sisemiselt omast nendele lehtedele.
The leaves are green.
Lehed on rohelised.
They are manifesting greenness.
Nad manifesteerivad rohelisust.
But greenness is not a property inherent in the leaf.
Kuid see rohelisus ei ole lehtede sees olev omand.
Greenness is revealed in its relation to all that is not green.
See rohelus avaldub kõige selle, mis ei ole roheline suhtes.
There is no intrinsic or inherent greenness in the green of the leaf.
Midagi sisemiselt rohelist ei ole nendes lehtedes.
And we can see this also because we have above it a spotlight.
Ja me võime seda näha ka tänu sellele, et siin üleval on siis selline punktvalgus.
Some of the leaves have a lot of light shining on them.
Mõnel lehel on väga palju valgust peal.
Some have a little.
Mõnel on vähem.
Some are in the shadow.
Mõnel on varjus.
These leaves in these different places look different.
Need lehed erinevates kohtades tunduvad või näivad erinevad.
Don't worry about that.
Aga muretse selle pärast.
We know they all are green.
Sest me teame, et nad kõik on rohelised.
It doesn't matter what they look like.
Pole tähtis, millised nad paistavad.
Due to the power of our developed thinking, we know this tree is an equal opportunity employer.
Tänu meie arenenud intellektile me teame, et see puu on
Every
what is this tree?
equal opportunity means
Võrdne võimalus, equal opportunity for who? Sorry, I lost it.
means like as a government policy to give free chance to everyone in the community. No prejudice. Men, women, immigrants.
Puhul ei ole siis eelistusi, võrdne suhtumine.
So every leaf is green.
Iga leht on roheline.
But every leaf doesn't look the same green.
Kuid iga leht ei paista sama roheline.
From the Buddhist point of view, this is very, very important.
Budistlikust vaatekohast on see väga tähtis.
Because it helps us to see that we don't see.
Kuna see aitab meil näha, et me ei näe.
What we take to be seeing is projection, interpretation,
See,
assumption.
seda, mida võtame antud omadusena, on tegelikult eeldus.
Our eyes show us many different shades of green.
Meie silm näeb erinevaid rohelisi variatsioone.
But our interpretation says, well, they're all green, it just depends on the light.
Aga meie interpretatsioon on see, et nad kõik on lihtsalt rohelised, see sõltub valgusest.
As if the greenness was a true essence, which is clearly established, and the difference in illumination is simply contingent, it's an environmental factor.
Justkui see rohelisus oleks omaolemuslik või selline olemuslik omadus ja kõik see väline on lihtsalt muutuv keskkond.
So this is what the Buddha is pointing to in terms of the absence of inherent self-nature or emptiness, shunyavad.
See on see, millele Buddha tähelepanu pöörab rääkides siis tühjusest või shunyavadast.
Shunya means empty, empty of substance, something which is self-confirming, self-existing, self-validated.
Shunya ehk siis tühi oma olemusest.
Yeah. If we say that the green is equally in each of the leaves,
kui me ütleme, et see rohelis on võrdselt igas lehes,
and the fact that they look different
ja see, et nad tunduvad erinevad,
doesn't tell us anything important,
ei ütle meile midagi tähtsat,
then we are going for an essentialistic reading.
siis me loeme seda olemuslikult või olemuslikuks.
That is to say, we are against phenomenology.
Me ehk siis oleme fenomenoloogia vastu.
The phenomena show themselves.
See meid ümbritsev näitab ennast.
And they show themselves according to the time of the year, the time of the day, the fact that the dome above me is rather dirty, and so the light's being factored through the dirt on the plastic.
Näitab ennast erinevates aastaaegades, erinevates ilmastikutingimustes. Valgus siin näitab, et see kuppel on suhteliselt räpane.
You can say these are all incidental.
Võib öelda, et need on kõik juhuslikud.
And that the greenness of the green is essential. It's embedded in the leaf.
Ja et selle lehe rohelisus on nagu olemuslik.
This is our normal reading.
Et see on meie tavaline nii-öelda situatsiooni lugemine.
And the advantage of that kind of reading is that it gives us a sense of predictability.
Sellise vaatenurga või eelis on see, et see annab meile nii-öelda see on nii-öelda ennustatav see olukorda.
Which gives us a confidence.
See annab meile enesekindluse.
That we have got some sense of how the world works.
Et meil on mingi teatav tunne, kuidas maailm toimib.
If you live in this town, you know your way around, you know how the streets work and what bus to take to go from here to there.
Linnas elades teate, kuidas liikuda ühest teise, kust liigub mingi buss ja nii edasi.
Knowing which bus to take.
Teate, millist bussi võtta.
When the bus with the right number on the front arrives, you get on.
Kui õige numbriga buss saabub ja te peale astute.
Maybe it's even the same bus as you got yesterday.
Võib-olla see on isegi sama buss, mille peale te eile istusite.
It would of course look a bit different.
Muidugi paistaks ta veidike erinev.
Maybe the driver's different.
Võib-olla sõitja erinev.
The other passengers are different.
Teised reisijad on erinevad.
Even if by chance they were to be exactly the same people, maybe they're wearing different clothes.
Ja isegi kui mingisuguse juhused on täpselt samad inimesed, kannavad alati teisi riideid.
They have different moods, different facial expressions and so on. Different postures.
Teistsugused seisundid, näoilmed, poosid.
This is what we encounter.
See on see, millega me kohtume.
But when you take an essentialistic reading, then you say, oh, I'm back on the bus, never mind. Nothing to think about the bus. I just read my book.
Aga nii-öelda olemuslikult mõeldes ei tundu seal bussis midagi uut olevat, võib rahulikult raamat lugeda.
You get the point here, because it's a central point for the development of Buddhist meditation.
See on põhiline buddhistliku meditatsiooni siis võtuse.
Because it opens the door to aesthetics.
Kuna see avab ukse esteetikale.
Out of the Heart Sutra, the development of the Mahayana view with Madhyamika philosophy, particularly the Prasangika view, then Yogacara, then you have Tantra coming. Tantra is concerned to allow a complete and instantaneous merging with the field of experience.
Pärast erinevaid Mahayana filosoofia suunasid tantra lähemine lubab suladuda õppe selle kogemuste väljaga.
The word tantra is rooted in tan, and tan means continuity.
Tantra sõna pärit siis sõna juurest. What was the root of the word?
Tan.
Tan, yes. Mis tähendab siis jätkuvust?
Means the continuity of all experience as experience.
Kõige kogemuse jätkuvus nii nagu kogetakse.
That is to say, we're sitting here. If you just turn your head around and you look from side to side across the room,
Ehk siis siin istudes, vaadates ühest ruumi küljest teise.
Many different things are revealed just in doing something like that.
Seda lihtsalt liigutust tehes paljud asjad avalduvad meie ees.
That is to say, the world shows itself.
Ehk siis teisiti öeldes maailm näitab ennast.
It's immediately here.
See on kohe siin.
What is it?
Mis see on?
You are at a crossroads, two paths.
Sa oled ristteel, kaks teed.
The path of analysis,
Analüüsi tee,
of trying to make sense of things.
püüdes asjadest aru saada,
which usually involves chopping things up, breaking them down into seeming constituent parts.
mis tavaliselt sisaldab siis asjade nii-öelda tükkideks või algosadeks lõhkumist.
Then reassembling them according to your model.
Seejärel uuesti kokku pannes oma mudeli järgi.
Or the other path is to be directly present with the entirety of the givenness of the field of experience.
Teine võimalus on olla vahetult kohal selle kogemuste välja sees.
But how would I know what's going on?
Aga kuidas ma tean, mis toimub?
Maybe that's not necessary.
Võib-olla pole see üldse tähtis.
Maybe, according to the Mahayana point of view, enlightenment is not knowing what's going on.
Ja võib-olla siis Mahayana vaate järgi virgumine ongi see, sorry, I just want to be sure that I'm saying now what you're saying. Can you repeat it?
Yeah. So, in the Mahayana view, enlightenment is not knowing what is going on.
Mahayana vaate järgi virgumine siis on see mitte teadmisest, mis parajasti toimub.
That is to say, it's moving from cognitive apprehension, getting hold of things via concepts.
Ehk siis asjadest kontseptuaalselt kinnihoidmise asemel. Yes.
Yeah. Towards the immediacy of the revealing of the creativity of the mind itself.
Siis selle asemel nagu meele loovuse.
Yeah, the revealing of the creativity of the mind itself.
Meele sellise loovuse avaldumise poole.
This is why the Heart Sutra is such an important text.
Seepärast on südasutra nii tähtis tekst.
Because what its analysis does, and you can read, there are many books on the Heart Sutra now, is the reason I'm not going through it line by line is we don't have enough time. I'll be doing that at the weekend. But the key point is you have a deconstruction of the central status of the individual person, or the ego self.
Kõige tähtsam, miks ta praegu rida-realt seda teksti läbi võtta, et praegu ta selleks nii palju aega. Seda ta teeb siis homse ja ülehomse päeva jooksul maal umbusil. Aga selle teksti kõige tähtsam mõte on siis, sorry, can you repeat last sentence?
The deconstruction of the individual ego or the ego self.
Kõige tähtsam selle mõte on siis selle ego nagu dekonstrueerimine selles tekstis.
Which when it's directly experienced decentralizes the organizing function of I, me, myself. Okay, so it decenters it. For example, you go shopping.
Näiteks lähete poodlema.
You want to buy, I don't know, something simple, a t-shirt.
Tahate osta midagi lihtsalt T-särki.
In the shop, there may be 100 different kinds of t-shirts.
Poes on võib-olla 100 erinevaid T-särke.
Immediately you know 50 of them are shit.
Koheselt teate, et 50 nendest on.
Who could wear such nonsense?
Kes küll sellist jama kannaks?
Not me.
Ega ometi mina.
What is the organizing principle?
Mis on siin see organiseeriv põhimõte?
Me.
Mina.
My values, my history.
Minu väärtused, minu ajalugu.
This is what we bring. You go shopping, you go in the supermarket. They have 1,000 kinds of food. You have a little basket.
See on kogu pooldamise mõte, et on 100 erinevaid, 1000 erinevaid tooteid, et sul on väike kott või korv.
How many kinds of things do you see and never buy?
Kui palju erinevaid asju te näete, aga kunagi ei osta.
Who buys them? People called not me.
Et kes neid küll ostab? Inimesed, keda nimetatakse, mitte mina.
The world is full of not me's who buy things that I don't buy.
Maailm on täis mitte minasid, kes ostavad asju, mida mina ei osta.
This is fundamental.
See on fundamentaalne.
Each of us is the center of the world.
Igaüks meist on maailma kese.
And because of that we are burdened.
Ja seetõttu me kannatame siis.
it's all up to me.
Et see kõik sõltub minust.
And if I make bad choices,
Ja kui ma teen halva valiku,
my life becomes difficult.
minu elu muutub raskeks.
And then I see these other people,
Ja siis ma näen teisi inimesi
and they have happy lives,
ja nendel on õnnelikud elud.
and I hate them.
Ja ma vihkan neid.
I envy them.
Ma kadestan neid.
It's not fair.
See ei ole õiglane.
Why did my mother not tell me? Probably she did.
Why did my mother
Not tell me how to live.
Miks mu ema küll mulle ei öelnud, kuidas elada?
This is of central importance. If you see that your entire experience of the world is mediated through your historically collected set of assumptions, evaluations, and interpretive structures,
Kui sa näed kogu sinu maailm koosneb sinu ajaloost, mis on kogutud, siis eeldused, interpretatsioonid, nii edasi.
then you see that you're trapped in a terrible double move.
Siis näete ka seda, et olete vangis selles kogutavas double move.
Double move.
Topelt siis liikumises või edasi-tagasi liikumises.
As I move towards something that I like,
Liikudes millegi poole, mis meeldib,
I'm alienated from what is there.
võõrandun ma sellest, mis on seal.
Because the fact that I like it means that I have already put myself onto it.
Sest fakt, et see meeldib mulle, tähendab seda, et ma olen ennast sellele objektile
Some of you
pealvalmi sisse pannud.
Some of you will recognize this is a completely central theme in European philosophy. Immanuel Kant spent a lot of time concerned with this. You have the Ding and Sich, the thing itself, the thing in itself. Can you approach that? Can you ever have that? Plato struggled with the same issue, as did Aristotle.
See on Euroopa filosoofia üks põhiprobleem, et asjad iseendas kandi üks põhiprobleem, kas sa saad üldse mingile välisele objektile läheneda.
That because we filter the world through our existing structures, we can't get to the world itself.
Kuna me filtreerime või oma peas eksisteerivat ideed, seda maailma ei näe, seda objekti või seda maailma iseennast.
This is the motif that Plato sets out in his image of us living in a cave without direct access to what's outside. All we see is shadows created on the walls.
See on sama, mida Platon ütles, et me oleme nagu koopas, mitte nähes siis reaalselt maailma, vaid enda varjusid selle koopa seinal.
So, everything is empty means in the objects that we see, there is no hook on which to hang our assumptions.
Kõik on tühidab seda, et subjektidest pole nagu konksu, mille otsa riputada meie järeldusi.
And we ourselves are hookless.
Ja me ise oleme nii-öelda konksuta.
We tell things about ourselves.
Me räägime asju iseenda kohta.
We tell these to ourselves and to other people.
Räägime iseendale teistele.
I work as a psychotherapist. My job is listening to people telling funny stories about themselves.
Ma töötan psühhoterapeudina ja ma pean kuulama siis või kuulen inimesi rääkimas naljapäid lugusid iseendast.
They're talking themselves into existence.
Nad räägivad ennast olemasolevaks.
It's terrible. The sad thing is they're talking themselves into existence in an existence they don't like.
Kurb on see, et nad räägivad ennast olemisse, mis nendele endile ei meeldi.
My mother didn't like me.
Ta emale ei meeldinud tema.
I was remembering again when I was 7, she was like this. Yeah, that's what the person kind of thinks. I'm not going through confessions.
Okay. Yeah, well, we lost it. But so, I think they got it.
Yeah. So, in that kind of story, the person is creating themselves.
Taustes lugudes siis inimene loob iseennast.
Even if you have a terrible childhood and your parents are disgusting.
Isegi kui on õudne lapsepõlv ja vanemad on vastikud.
The sun shines.
Päike paistab.
You climb at least one tree in your life.
Vähemalt ühe puued sa ronid elu jooksul.
You see at least one beautiful sunset.
Vähemalt ühte ilusat päikesele näete.
So shit is not the whole story.
Ja et see pask, mis
That
see ei ole kogu lugu.
That is to say, when you fall in love with your narrative,
Armudes oma lukku või loosse,
you essentialize yourself, just in the same way as you essentialize all the leaves on the tree are green.
Pöördad ennast siis olemas oleks samamoodi nagu see nende lehtede rohelisust nende oma olemuseks siis.
But if you are present in your life,
Kuid olles kohal oma elus,
in each day,
igas päevas,
you have hundreds of thousands of moments of experience.
Sadu tuhandeid siis erinevaid kogemusi.
Colors, taste, shapes, smells, moods, feelings, sensations in the body.
Värve, maitseid, vorme, tundeid kehas ja nii edasi.
Arising and passing.
Tekkimas ja möödumas.
Ungraspable.
Haaramatud.
You can grasp them as narrative.
Sa võid neid haarata kui lugu.
But that is to transmute them into something which they are not.
Aga see tähendaks nende moondamist millekski, mida nad ei ole.
Just as when you feel the sensation in your shoulder and you say, I have a pain in my shoulder.
Samuti kui tundes valu oma õlas ja öeldes, et mul on valu.
The immediacy of the raw presentation is disguised and lost and covered up.
Selle kogemuse, selle toore kogemuse vahetus on kaetud siis selle looga või kirjeldusega.
By being subsumed into this narrative of there is a pain in my shoulder.
Siis olles selles loos, valuloos sees, õla valuloos.
That is to say, we exist in a world composed of events, not of entities.
Ehk teisiti öeldes me oleme maailmas, mis koosneb lugudest, mitte asjadest.
Events which are revealing themselves in the matrix of space and time.
Sündmused, mis avaldavad ennast aja maatriksis, aja ja tuumatriksis.
And all we ever grasp are traces.
Ja kõik, mida me haarame, on need jäljed.
Remnants, which we then construct.
Jäljed, mida me siis uuesti konstrueerime.
There's a lot of research now on memory, and memory is a very active, dynamic process. We are constantly rejigging our memories, and in fact, when we tell the story about our life to 10 different people, we all tell it in different ways, because memory is relationally evoked.
Uuritakse palju mälestusi või mälu ja mälu on aktiivne protsess, pidevalt muutub, et 10 inimesele oma lugu rääkides arvatavasti räägime seda iga kord uuel moel.
And this is very important, because out of the understanding of the Heart Sutra, moving into Tantra, you have an emphasis on these two aspects of wisdom and compassion.
See on väga tähtis. Seda suutrast edasi Tantra tõlgendus võib minnes ka kaks teenest lähendab poolus, siis mõistmine ja kaastumine.
And wisdom is to see there is no substantial basis of self-existing entitative substance in any phenomenon.
Mõistmine siis, et üheski objektis või asjas pole oma olemust.
Which means we don't know much about anything.
Mis tähendab, et me tegelikult ei tea millegi kohta eriti mitte midagi.
Now this could be a blessing.
See võib olla ka õnnistus.
Because we all have judgment.
Sest me kõik hindame.
And we all have prejudice.
Me kõigil on eelarvamused.
Which leads to foreclosure.
Mis teeb neid suletuks.
Which makes us narrow-minded and bigoted.
Mis teeb meid kitsarinnaliseks ja
which is not maybe the highest point of human development.
Mis ei ole vast inimese arengu nagu kõrgel eesmärk.
Not to know.
Mitte teada.
Well, you know what John is like.
Sorry?
You know what John is like. You know what anybody is like.
Yeah, okay. Näiteks te teate, milline on John.
And of course, that's the beginning of gossip.
Ja see on juba
because we agree that there is a person called John who is knowable as the Johnness of John. Well, we all know what he is like.
on olemas keegi, kes oma Johnilikkuses on. Ei tea, milline John on.
But the fact is, although a lot of the time we are indeed trapped inside our habitual patterning,
tavaliselt me oleme harjumuspärase nii-öelda mustrite kütkes.
if you see that that habitual patterning is indeed empty,
Nähes, et need mustrid on tegelikult tühjad.
that is to say, it's not resting on any substantial basis.
Et need ei asu mitte mingisugusel olemuslikul või
But it is
alusel.
a temporary contingent configuration of factors which meet and show this and then vanish like a kaleidoscope turning.
Tegelikult tegemist millega, mis kaleidoskoobis tekib ja kaob.
How do we have the confidence to know who John is?
Kuidas me siis teaksime, kes on John?
John is a potential.
John on potentsiaal.
John is a sign of manifestation.
It's
a sight, a situation of manifestation.
On lihtsalt teatav manifesteerunud olukord või koht.
Just as we are.
Nagu me isegi.
It's not very nice when other people know who we are.
It's not very nice?
No, so.
Sest on see mõista head korrektiis. Et see ei ole väga kena, kui inimesed teavad, kes me oleme.
Because then they see things like, oh, but you don't like that. Come on, what are you doing?
Et sulle ei meeldi see, et come on, mida sa ometigi mõtled.
Because if you are unreliable and so that I can't know who you are, you're shaking my world.
Kui sa oled usaldamatu, kui ma ei tea, milline sa oled, siis see raputab ka minu maailma.
So if you keep people in their boxes, then you know where you are.
Kui sa hoiad inimese kastis, siis sa tead ka ise, kes sa oled.
The extreme form of that is the structure of totalitarian regimes.
Et kui oma kõige ekstreemses väljatus on see siis totalitaarsete režiimide olemus.
Where you can know exactly what are the qualities of different ethnic minorities, different genders, and so on.
Kus sa tead täpselt, millised on siis erinevate etniliste või gruppide olemus või kirjad.
As we know very sadly, this leads to murder, mass murder.
Kahjuks teame väga hästi, et see viib massimõrvadeni.
But when we encounter any situation,
Kui ükskõik millise olukorda sattudes,
if we look before we think,
kui me vaatame enne, kui me mõtleme,
and we look so that we see,
ja vaatame nii, et me tõesti näeme,
we may not need to think so much.
ei pea nii palju mõtlema.
Because the truth of the situation will be revealed.
Sest see situatsiooni tõde või olemus siis avaldub iseenesest.
If you attend to your stomach,
Attend to your stomach.
yeah, if you listen to your stomach,
Aha, okei. Kui sa kuuled oma kõhtu
and you really listen to your stomach,
ja sa tõesti kuuled oma kõhtu,
it will tell you that you don't need another piece of cake.
siis ütleb sulle, et sul ei ole vaja tahta teist koogitükki,
But you want a piece of cake.
aga sa tahad koogitükki.
Who is the one who wants the extra piece of cake?
Kes on see, kes tahab ekstra koogitükki?
It's usually a mental construct,
Tavaliselt on see mentaalne konstruktsioon.
a habitual orientation or an emotional lack in a moment. Something is speaking for the stomach.
Harjumuslik orientatsioon või mingi emotsionaalne tühjus, midagi, mis kõneleb läbi kõhu.
So, emptiness means to see the lack of validity in the constructs that you layer on top of the world.
Tühjus tähendab siis nende, et sa näed konstruktsioonide usaldusväärsust ei kehti, mida sa
it doesn't mean is that if you take away these constructs, there will be nothing there at all.
kuid see ei tähenda, et konstruktsioonid nii-öelda eemaldudes seal ei olegi midagi.
What is there is the vitality of the ceaselessly presenting field of experience.
See, mis seal on nii-öelda lakkamatult avalduv kogemus.
This is difficult to do.
Seda on raske teha.
This is a training that armed police and soldiers have to do.
See on midagi sellist, mida sõdurid peavad tegema.
For example, nowadays, because they do a lot of clearing of cities and difficult streets.
Tänapäeval tihtipeale tegema siis linnade tänavate clearing.
Like urban warfare.
Puhastamist siis.
In the training camps, the soldiers go with their guns into a place where there are doors, and suddenly the door opens and someone comes out.
Treening siis situatsioonis sõdurid mingites hoonetes.
If it's someone holding a gun, they should shoot.
Ja ootavad, tavanevad mingid uksed, keegi on seal, kui see keegi kannab relva, nad peaksid tulistama.
If it's someone holding a baby, they shouldn't shoot.
Keegi, kes hoiab last, nad ei peaks tulistama.
There's not much time.
Seal pole palju aega.
That is to say, they have to shoot what they see, not what they imagine.
Seda peab tulistama seda, või siis mitte tulistama seda, mida nad näevad, või mitte seda, mida nad ette kujutavad.
So, for example, this is the case in Britain at the moment of British soldiers in Iraq when the war was on in Basra.
Näiteks Briti sõdurid Iraagis, Basras.
And they catch some Iraqis.
Viitsid mõned iraaklased kinni.
And just before that, one of their comrades had been shot dead.
Just enne seda üks nende kaaslastest sai surma.
So they start kicking these Iraqi people in the head.
Ja nad hakkasid need vangi võetud iraaklasi siis pähe peksma.
Who were they attacking?
Keda nad ründasid?
Clearly on one level they are attacking this particular person on the ground.
Ilmselgelt ühel tasandil nad ründasid seda inimest, kes seal maas lebas.
But in Bakhtin's terms, that the addressee, the one they were really speaking to, were the bastards who shot their comrade.
Kuid keda nad tegelikult siis peksid oma peas, oli siis see kaavakas, kes nende kaaslase maha lastis.
Unfortunately, they didn't catch that one.
Kahjuks ei saanud seda kätte, kes tegelikult tulistas.
They caught someone who was innocent.
Said kätte kellegi, kes oli süütu.
And they didn't want to see that this person is innocent.
Aga nad ei tahtnud näha, et see inimene on süütu.
Because they are charged up with this emotion, and so they project the interpretation onto this person and they kill him.
Kuna nad on laetud selle emotsiooniga ja projetiseerivad oma viha sellesse süütusse isikusse, kelle nad siis tapavad.
We can understand this.
Seda on võimalik mõista.
I'm sure we all experience this in various ways.
Me oleme kõik seda erineval moel kogenud.
So, if cognitive analysis of situations is not quick enough in the immediacy of the moment, what can we do?
Kui see kognitiivne analüüs ei ole selles talle piisavalt kiire selles situatsioonis, mida me saame teha?
And it was the experience of the development of meditation to try to address this issue which led to the ripening of the various levels of tantric practice, Mahamudra and Dzogchen.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so it was the exploration of trying to develop methods of meditation which would make this possible.
Taoliste meetodite arendamine, mis võimaldaks taolist vahetult.
That led to the development of the various strands of Tantra and Mahamudra and Dzogchen.
Tantra, Mahamudra, Dzogcheni meetodite tekkeni.
In Tantra, they're primarily concerned with raising aesthetic appreciation to open the heart and merging ego consciousness into the openness of awareness.
Tantra siis põhiliselt tegeletakse seda esteetilise väärtuse hindamisega, et avada süda ja, sorry, what's the second part of the open the heart?
Yeah, open the heart so that there can be an unmediated merging with the immediacy of experience.
Saaks toimuda see vahetult tekkiv selle kogemusega sulandumine.
And these other schools like Mahamudra and Dzogchen are concerned with spontaneity.
Teised koolkonnad, kes Mahamudra Dzogchen on siis rohkem seotud spontaansusega.
That is to say, in this moment,
Selles hetkes,
where do I come from?
kust ma tulen.
Each of us here can tell many stories about where we've come from.
Igaüks meist siin võib rääkida erinevaid lugusid, kust me tuleme.
The place we grew up, what our family was like, what kind of school we went to, whether we are satisfied with our life or not, and so on.
Milline oli meil perekond, kus me käisime koolis, kus me oleme eluga rahul, nii edasi ja edasi.
This is a kind of horizontal axis across space and time.
Et see on nagu selline horisontaalne joon läbi siis aja ja ruumi.
But there is also a direct immediacy to each moment.
Kuid on olemas ka otsene vahetu
When we
selge tajumine.
when we don't fill the space with our assumptions and our interpretations,
Kui me ei taju siis seda ruumi meie eelduste ja interpretatsioonidega,
we are just there with it.
ma olen lihtsalt sellega koos.
Sometimes you might experience that, say in art, maybe looking at a Mark Rothko painting.
Mõnikord võite seda kogeda näiteks kunsti vaadates, näiteks Mark Rothko maali, abstraktsionist Ameerikas.
Or with a sunset, or watching the gentle movement of the waves on the infinite surface of the water.
Või siis päikeseloojangu peegeldust veepinnal vaadates.
Or you might have it just looking in the face of a small baby.
Või väikese lapse nägu vaadates.
A kind of timeless moment.
Mõnes mõttes ajatu hetk.
The wonderful clarity and openness of the baby's gaze allows you to just respond. Oh.
Et see imeline lapse avatud pilk võimaldab sul vahetult vastata avaneda.
The hospitality of the baby to you allows you to empty to it.
Selle lapse avatus võimaldab sul
In these traditions, this is called meditating sky to sky.
Nendes traditsioonis nimetab seda siis sellist olukorda I'm sorry, I'm trying to kahe taeva vaheline siis kommunikatsioon, ma ei tea, kuidas seda kirjeldada eesti keeles, et see kohmakalt kõlab,
That is to say, if you see a mountain against the sky, you see this is a mountain, this is a sky.
Näiteks nähes taevast ja mäge.
But if a sky meets a sky, then there is no boundary, there is no difference.
Taevas omaette ongi taevas, millel ei ole mingisuguseid piire.
So, when the space of the heart opens and comes out through the gaze, we just receive. And when that happens in both directions, you have non-duality. There is no separation.
Ja kui taoline südameavatus on mõlemas suunas, siis ongi non-duaalsus või mitte kahesus siis, et ei ole lahusoleku tunnet.
And the advantage of this, in terms of practical daily life, is that it is directly connected with the phenomenological world.
Ja selle praktiline väärtus on see, et selles on vahetu seos selle fenomenoloogilise maailmaga.
It's not a symbolic ground.
See on sümboolne ilm.
It's not a cognitive ground.
See ei ole kognitiivne ilm.
It's directly there.
See on vahetult seal.
Some of you may have the experience of running down the side of a mountain or being on a mountain bike and you're going very, very quickly.
Mõnel teist võib see tekkida siis, kui jooksete mäest alla või veel mingites taolistes olukordades.
Generally speaking, you're safe if you don't think.
Üldiselt öeldes võite ennast turvaliselt, kui ta siis selles olukorras ei not thinking. You're safe when you're not thinking, when you run down.
Yeah, you're running down the hill very fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Once you start to think, you fall over your own feet. Once you start to think, you fall over.
Jah, kui te hakkate sellise olukorras mõtlema, siis te võite kukkuda liikuda.
It's the same when they say, like, if you fall off a horse, what you have to do is immediately get back on the horse. Because then there is just you and the horse.
Et see sama või kukkudest, et kohe tõusma ja sellest tõuseb hüppama, sest selles olukorras, et teie ja hobune.
But if you fall off the horse and you go away and you think about it, you develop a new best friend.
Kuid kukkudes uue sellest ja aastaselt kõrvale mõeldes sellele arendate, seal on new best friend.
New best friend.
Arendate siis või tekitate uue siis parima sõbra.
Because there's me and my trauma.
Sest sellest, et on mina ja mu trauma.
I never thought that would happen.
Ma oleks kunagi arvanud, et see
I'm not sure if I trust horses anymore.
Ma ei ole kindel, kas ma hobusid enam usaldan.
So then you go to get back on the horse.
Ja siis lähed tagasi hobusi selga.
But it's like a love triangle.
Aga kui teil on tegemist juba siis armu kolmnurgaga.
There's the horse that I used to love and I was married to.
See hobune, keda ma armastasin ja olin abielus.
But now I like hanging out with my trauma.
Aga nüüd mulle meeldib siis käia jalutamas oma traumaga.
And the thing about horses is they're very jealous.
Probleem hobustega on selles, et nad on väga armukarjalised.
So if you get on the horse holding your trauma, the horse is likely to object.
Astub või hüppab tõusi selga, hoides oma traumat.
I think we know this in our life. Thinking is very useful for some things, but for a lot of life it's not necessary.
Kindlasti kõik oma elus väga mõtlemine on mingites olukordades väga kasulik, kuid mitte vajalik kõikides olukordades.
So the central point of the understanding of the Heart Sutra is to open the space in which we trust the clarity of the mind to give an immediate unfolding of what is there.
Südasuhtes põhiline mõte on selles, et avatud süda, et sorry, can you repeat again?
So, the Heart Sutra is encouraging us towards a deconstruction or an unloosening of the assumptions which stop us being open to what is there.
Aitab siis dekonstrueerida neid eeldusi, mis takistavad meil avatud olemust.
This opens the middle way.
See avab nii-öelda kesktee.
We are not glued into things believing that they're truly real.
Me ei ole nii-öelda kleebitud asjade külge arvates, et nad on tõeliselt reaalsed.
Nor are we trying to develop a protective space and isolation and avoidance.
Ega püüda ka siis tekitada sellist kaitsvat tsooni või ruumi, püüdes vältida maailma või juba võtta.
But rather by staying relaxed, open and present.
Vaid pigem siis jäädes lõdvestunuks avatuks ja kohalolevaks.
What is required, what is necessary, will come into being as us.
Ja siis, mis on vajalik avaldub iseenesest.
Yeah. This is an experience that jazz musicians have all the time.
See on kogemus, mis näiteks džässmuusikutel on pidevalt.
Manifest in contact improvisation.
Siis avaldub näiteks kontakt improvisatsioonis.
There are many ways in which we can start to feel that actually I get in the way of myself. And I get in the way of myself by knowing who I am.
Sellise olukorras, et mina iseendale piltades ette ja teades, kes ma olen.
Okay, so that's just about the end of where we've got to. There are many different ways to approach the Heart Sutra.
On väga palju võimalikke erinevaid viise, kuidas südasutrale läheneda.
It's got a historical document.
See on ajalooline dokument,
which is interesting in its way.
Mis on omal moel.
But it's also a very interesting tool for starting to unlock some of the rigidity which holds us in place.
ühtlasi on ta ka, võib vaadata seda vahendina, mis aitab meil vabaneda teatavast jäikusest.
So that we come to replace identity, whether it's how we identify ourselves or identify other people or the objects around us.
Sorry, I just started to listen and not thinking what that.
Okay. So we're almost at the last sentence, almost home. So if it's moving away from identification, identifying yourself as being like this and that, identifying other people, objects and so on.
Enese teiste objektide identifitseerimise asemel.
To experiencing our potential as a richness of resourcing.
Kogeda meie potentsiaali selliste
so that
materjalide allikana või.
So that rather than carrying the things that we make the basis of our identity.
Selle asemel, et seda asju kanda kui meie olemasolu kui identiteedi nagu alust.
Which of course limits what else we can carry.
Mida muud saaksime kanda, et see?
We live with open hands. We
saame elada ka avatud kätte ja avatud südamega.
Not without anything, but paradoxically with everything. Not without anything.
Mitte ilma millegita.
But paradoxically with everything.
Vaid paradoksaalselt hoopis kõigega.
Because the less you define yourself, the more you can access the many, many wonderful resources that are in the world.
Mida vähem sa ennast defineerid, seda rohkem võimalusi on maailmale läheneda.
Oh, thank you for inviting me here. I hope you found this interesting in some way. Maybe not what you were expecting.
Tänan mind siia kutsumast ja leidsite sellest jutust midagi huvitavat enda jaoks. Võib-olla mitte päris seda, mida ootasite. Yes. Maybe we have time for 1-2 questions.
No, because I think we have to leave.
Märkin, kas meil on aega paariks küsimuseks või ei ole?
Sina.
There is
You've got a lot of time.
Okay, so maybe one question.
Okay, one question. Any question?
If no one has them about this part of your job as a psychotherapist, like people often go to a psychotherapist to tell their stories exactly. Like, is it necessary to come to this understanding that it's not really that important, your story? Do you still have to go into the story and then kind of come back from it, or can you not go into it at all?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. You can tell a story in two ways. For example, I could tell you about something that happened, say, I don't know, when I was 5.
Lugu võib rääkida kahel moel, näiteks alustades oli 5-aastane.
And I could tell it in a way that, when I was 5, I remember being in school and it was really horrible and I really missed my mom and she left me there. And the more I tell the story, I can wind myself into it. So I go from here and now into there and then.
Ühesõnaga, või siis teisel moel sama lugu rääkides, kurtes hädaldades ennast sinna sisse, jõudes ühest teise.
And the danger with that is that I'm going to re-traumatize myself if I'm talking about it.
Sellise rääkimise, loo rääkimise oht on selles, et uuesti taas ennast traumatiseerida.
So we might need to do that a little bit at first.
Et alguses võib seda veidike teha.
But if it goes on too long, it becomes iatrogenic. It becomes a problem created by the treatment.
Kui seda liiga pikalt teha, see loob uue probleemi, mida see ravi loob ise uue probleemi.
Because we need to come to, I think, it's my own belief, but I think we have to come to a place where the past is over there.
Peaksime jõudma kohta, kus minevik on siis kuskil kaugemal.
And I can talk about the past as the past.
olen rääkinud minevikust kui minevikust.
So I'm not denying that it happened,
ma ei eita, et see juhtus.
but I'm standing in my life now with the resources I have now. I'm not regressing into it.
Ma seisan siin ja praegu, mitte siis kaldudes sinna minevikudesse lukku.
And of course, introducing some degree of meditation into psychotherapy practice is very helpful for that.
Aga meditatsioonitehnikate kasutamine psühhoteraapias on ka kasulik.
It means in the last 20 years, the rise of mindfulness as a tool in psychotherapy has made huge differences.
Mindfulness, see kõige parem tõlge on eesti keeles. Teadvoleku toomine siis psühhoteraapiasse on psühhoteraapia arengud kõvasti kaasa aidanud.
Because people start to be able to hear themselves telling the story they're telling.
Inimesed hakkavad iseennast kuulama või tähele panema, et nad räägivad oma peas lugusid.
They have some space.
Siis teatud ruum.
And what they're talking about is quite dense and sticky and attractive.
Ja see, millest nad räägivad, siis taga on ikka selline...
And they have some space. And gradually the dynamic of the sticky being the dominant one shifts so that gradually the space becomes more dominant. And the sticky can move through the space.
Nad on võimelised siis sellest oma raskest loost lahti laskma ja selle ümber tekib teatud ruum.